Welcome to the debate. When you envision a global library, you imagine shelves neatly organized, books categorized by subject, a sort of quiet efficiency to the whole system.
Right. Everyone follows the rules.
Exactly, everyone follows the rules. But imagine if one day people just stopped bringing in books and started rolling in entire shipping containers full of, I don't know, completely random items like photo albums, video game code, digital receipts, and they just park them right there in the aisles.
Yeah, the librarians wouldn't be able to do their jobs. I mean, the structural integrity of the floor would eventually just give out.
Right. And eventually, the people who actually run that library would have to, change the locks. They'd have to enforce a strict size limit on what can even be brought through the front doors. And that exact scenario is playing out right now on the largest decentralized network in the world. We are rapidly approaching the activation deadline in late August, early September 2026 for Bitcoin's BIP 110. Also known as the Reduced Data Temporary Soft Fork.
Right, and just to clarify for everyone, this is a proposal aimed at restricting arbitrary data embedding, so things like ordinals, runes, or taproot data abuse. It restricts all of that to a strict 256-byte limit.
Yeah? And what makes this incredibly tense is BIP 110's, its unprecedented 55% miner signaling threshold. And that's paired with a user-activated soft fork, or UASF mechanism. So it poses this really fundamental question, right? Can a decentralized faction of node operators successfully force miners to adopt a data cap?
Or does this low threshold basically guarantee a catastrophic chain split?
Exactly. Now, I argue that the BIP 110 UASF is a necessary, totally viable defense mechanism to protect the network from, technical debt and bloat, following the proven historical precedent of nodes forcing miner capitulation.
And I argue that attempting a soft fork with a 55% threshold, zero explicit replay protection, and no major institutional backing is, quite frankly, a deeply flawed strategy. It is destined to fracture the network or create this economically irrelevant ghost chain.
Well, let me lay out the groundwork for why I see BIP 110 as honestly not just viable, but essential. My position rests on a fundamental truth of the network's architecture, which is that nodes, not hash power, dictate the rules. I mean, miners are service providers, right?
They follow profit, yeah.
Right, profit. And BIP 110 is structurally similar to the 2017 SegWit USF, the one known as BIP 48. So by utilizing upgraded software specifically, we're talking about Bitcoin knots version 29.2 or later, node operators can set a strict deadline, a flag day.
Right.
On this day, they just automatically reject blocks filled with megabytes of arbitrary data. And if nodes reject those bloated blocks, miners are going to be forced to comply, exactly as they did in 2017, just to avoid mining worthless coins. This mechanism safely enacts the 256-byte limit by, reminding miners who actually validates the ledger.
Okay, but I think that perspective relies on a very, very selective reading of the 2017 USF victory.
How so?
Because the 2017 soft fork didn't succeed merely because some developers put a deadline into the code. It succeeded because of an overwhelming economic consensus. I mean, major exchanges, liquidity providers, massive wallet ecosystems, they effectively held a gun to the miners' heads. They said, if you don't mine these upgraded blocks, your rewards won't be accepted at our deposit addresses.
But that's just an extension of the node power.
But today, the landscape is entirely different. BIP 110 miner signaling is currently hovering at what, a fraction of a percent? It's like 0.42 to 0.6% right now.
Currently, yes.
And more importantly, there is zero backing from institutional heavyweights. Pushing this through today doesn't mirror the success of SegWit. It actually mirrors the disastrous SegWit 2X attempt later that same year, which collapsed specifically because it lacked genuine economic consensus.
See, I don't think you can compare this to SegWit 2X at all. I mean, SegWit 2X was an attempt by corporations and miners to force a block size increase onto the nodes. The nodes rejected it, and the corporations had to back down. So that actually proves my point. The nodes have the ultimate veto power, regardless of what the institutional heavyweights want.
Yeah, but
It isn't just about, massive custodians issuing press releases. It's about the absolute cryptographic threat of node rejection. To understand this, we really have to look at the anyone can spend technical magic that made the 2017 upgrade work, which BIP 110 leverages in a very similar way.
the backward compatibility trick, right?
Exactly. So when a soft fork happens, it's designed so old, unupgraded nodes don't realize the rules have even changed. In 2017, developers basically wrapped the new transaction types in an old format called anyone can spend. Now, to an old node, what did that look like?
Well, it looked like a transaction with a blank signature field. Basically, free money sitting on the table that anyone could claim.
Right. Anyone could claim it. But to an upgraded node, the real signature was hidden in a newly created witness section of the block.
Which created a pretty fascinating trap for malicious actors.
Precisely. If a malicious, unupgraded miner tried to exploit that blank signature to, steal the funds, they would mine a block containing that theft. Now, to their old software, the block looked perfectly valid. But the moment they broadcasted it to the upgraded network,
The upgraded nodes checked it, yeah.
right, they checked the hidden witness section, found no valid signature, and rejected the entire block.
And the miner burns thousands of dollars in electricity for nothing.
The trap claps shut. They lose their entire block reward. It's exactly like a biological immune system. Upgraded nodes don't ask a virus for permission to attack it. They just reject the infection. The miners learn very quickly that they have to fall in line to survive. They don't need BlackRock to tell them that. Their own shrinking profit margins tell them that.
Okay, but you're assuming the mechanics map over cleanly to a 55% threshold. And frankly, the math simply doesn't support that.
Why not?
Because in 2017, when that trap clapped shut, the upgraded miners held over 90% of the network's hash power. An unupgraded miner trying to cheat stood absolutely zero chance of building a longer chain. Their invalid blocks were wiped out instantly by this tidal wave of compliant hash power. But BIP 110 is trying to do this with just 55%.
But 55% is still a majority. In a longest chain consensus model, a 55% majority will inevitably outpace a 45% minority. Over time, the 55% chain becomes the definitive ledger.
Eventually, yes, it outpaces it. But a 45% minority is not a stray, isolated, malicious miner falling into an anyone-can-spend trap. It is a massive, highly capable, economically viable army. If BIP 110 activates at exactly its 55% threshold, those remaining 45% of legacy miners aren't going to just be orphaned into oblivion overnight. They will consistently produce blocks.
Well, they'll try.
No, they will. Because 45% of the hash power is so substantial, their chain won't just disappear. What happens is the upgraded nodes will reject the legacy blocks, the legacy nodes will ignore the BIP 110 rules, and the blockchain will cleanly, permanently fracture into two competing chains. You aren't coercing the minority into compliance here, you are guaranteeing a messy divorce.
I see a split differently, though. The threat of a split is exactly what creates the coercion. Miners operate on razor-thin margins. If they see 55% of the network preparing to orphan their blocks, the game theory dictates they will not risk being in the 45% minority. They'll defect to the majority to guarantee their revenue. We saw miners panic just days before the deadline in 2017 and capitulate for this exact reason.
But you're assuming a split is this clean break that only punishes the miners. It's not. If this network fractures at 55%, we are looking at an absolute catastrophe for the everyday user, primarily because of cross-chain replay attacks.
Because BIP 110 is a soft fork, it doesn't include explicit replay protection.
Exactly. And we really need to explain how terrifying that is. When a blockchain splits into chain A and chain B, they share the exact same history up to the moment of the fork. The same private keys control the same coins on both networks.
Right.
So if you broadcast a transaction to spend your coins on chain A, that transaction is just a mathematical signature. Without replay protection, an attacker can literally copy that signature from chain A's public ledger and broadcast it or replay it onto chain B.
Because the signature is perfectly valid on both chains?
Exactly. Your coins on chain B move against your will. It's like writing a check at a grocery store and the cashier photocopying it to cash it again at a completely different bank.
Yikes. Yeah.
When Bitcoin Cash hard forked away from the main network back in 2017, they prevented this by implementing explicit replay protection. They changed a technical flag called SIG# fork ID, and because of that flag, a Bitcoin Cash transaction looked like gibberish to the main network, and vice versa. It was totally safe.
But BIP 110 doesn't have that.
Right. BIP 110 lacks that built-in safety net. Every standard transaction will look identical to both networks. The moment this split happens, major exchanges are going to immediately freeze all trading. They have to, just to prevent massive liability from users accidentally draining their cross-chain balances.
Okay, but I think you're underestimating the tools users have to protect themselves here. Yes, without explicit replay protection, there is friction, but users who are dedicated to the BIP 110 vision, they don't have to wait for exchanges to save them. They have a technical workaround. They can manually taint their coins.
Oh, come on. Walk me through how you expect an average user to do that.
Look, it requires finding a newly minted coin that exists only on the BIP 110 chain, right? Like a block reward mined after the split. You take a tiny fraction of that new unique coin and you mix it with your old coins in a single transaction.
Okay, but
Wait, let me finish. Because that new coin literally does not exist on the legacy chain, the entire transaction becomes mathematically impossible to replay. On the legacy chain, you've safely split your balances and you can transact freely on the upgraded network.
you're asking everyday users to perform advanced cryptographic coin mixing just to use the network safely.
Well, let's reframe that friction for a second. Isn't the friction of manual coin tainting just a necessary filter? Doesn't it ensure that only the most dedicated, technically competent users are dictating the future of a censorship-resistant chain? I mean, if you want to protect the network from being bloated by corporate data storage, you might have to do some heavy lifting. We shouldn't cater the base layer rules to passive institutional capital that doesn't care about node decentralization.
A global monetary network cannot rely on manual UTXO tainting as a filter for ideological purity. That fundamentally misunderstands how liquidity works. Everyday users will not do this. They're going to leave their funds on exchanges. And exchanges favor stability over ideology every single time. Faced with a complex, dangerous splitting process, exchanges are not going to build custom software wrappers to manually taint coins and prevent replay attacks for a 55% minority chain. They will simply refuse to list the BIP 110 chain entirely.
Even if 55% of the hash power is securing it?
Hash power follows price, and price is dictated by where the coins can actually be traded. We saw this exact scenario play out with the Ethereum proof-of-work chain, ETHW, after the network transitioned to proof-of-stake in 2022.
Right, a faction of miners tried to keep the old proof-of-work chain alive.
And they had the hash power to do it initially, but the infrastructure didn't follow. The major stablecoins, the DeFi protocols, the central exchanges, they all exclusively supported the new chain. Because the economic endpoints refused to support ETHW, the legacy tokens on that chain were worthless. I mean, it became an economic ghost town almost instantly. Miners cannot force value onto a chain, and neither can living room node operators. If Coinbase and BlackRock say, we only recognize the legacy chain because it's safe from replay attacks, the miners will mine the legacy chain, regardless of whether it has ordinals in it or not.
But in this case, the BIP 110 operators aren't the ones trying to force new value, right? They are trying to protect the existing base layer from becoming a mere data storage utility. We are talking about transactions, these massive ordinals and runes that only account for a tiny fraction, just basis points, of total miner revenue. If the BIP 110 nodes start rejecting these bloated blocks, why would miners risk their primary revenue stream, the block subsidy, just to protect data storage fees that barely impact their bottom line?
Because they aren't falling on their swords for the data fees. They are falling on their swords for the institutional liquidity that remains on the legacy chain. It really doesn't matter if they lose a block to a BIP 10 node if the coins they mine on the legacy chain are the only ones worth actual dollars on the open market.
Well, let's ground this theoretical game theory into the practical reality of what is actually going to happen in August 2026. because specifically we're looking at block 961632. This is the mandatory signaling window.
Right, where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah. So let's explain what signaling actually looks like. Right now, proponents of BIP 110 are signaling readiness using BIP 4 in the block header. When a miner finds a block, there's a piece of metadata called the version field. Miners are literally flipping a single binary digit, BIP 4, from a 0 to a 1 in that software envelope. It's a public declaration to the network saying, I am running the upgraded software and I am ready to enforce the data cap.
And right now, the number of miners flipping that bit is macroscopic? No, it's microscopic.
Currently, yes, it's small. The campaign is grassroots. It's backed by an estimated 7% to 15% of nodes. But we are seeing specific mining pools like Foundry opening up hash rate weighted votes to retail miners. They are letting the individual participants in the pool decide whether to flip BIP 4. If that grassroots pressure builds and that BIP 4 signaling climbs aggressively past that 55% threshold, by block 961,632, the network is going to witness a clean transition. The 1 megabyte ordinals will simply vanish from the mempool. Miners will realize the economic cost of having their blocks orphaned by an upgraded majority is just way too high a risk.
I predict the nothing burger scenario.
The nothing burger?
Yeah. You mentioned the 7% to 15% of nodes enforcing this. Because miner support is virtually non-existent today, when that flag day hits, those BIP 110 nodes are effectively going to fork themselves into a void.
But how can they fork into a void if they are the ones enforcing the strict rules? I mean, they are just rejecting invalid blocks.
They are enforcing strict rules on a network of one. Let's dig into the mechanics of the difficulty adjustment here, because this is the fatal flaw in the low-threshold UASF strategy. The network calibrates how hard it is to mine a block so that one is produced roughly every 10 minutes. This difficulty adjusts every 2016 blocks. If miner signaling stays under 1%, the BIP 110 chain will only have a microscopic fraction of global computing power, but the protocol will still expect blocks to be found at the difficulty level of 100% of the hash power.
So the block times slow down.
They don't just slow down, they grind to an absolute halt. At 1% hash rate, instead of 10 minutes, it will take them 1,000 minutes, over 16 hours to mine a single block.
Wow.
Yeah. To reach the next difficulty adjustment of 2016 blocks, it wouldn't take 2 weeks, it would take hundreds of days. The chain would be functionally paralyzed. Users wouldn't be able to get a transaction confirmed. Meanwhile, the legacy chain, supported by 99% of the hash rate, just marches on uninterrupted, confirming blocks every 10 minutes.
Okay, but that logic breaks down when you assume the hash rate remains static. The entire premise of a USF is that hash rate is dynamic, right? It moves in response to economic node enforcement. If a user is running a BIP 110 node, they aren't just sitting there in a vacuum waiting for blocks. They are acting as economic endpoints for transactions. If you are an apathetic holder, sure, your best move is to hold your keys in cold storage and wait out the storm.
Right.
But if you are sympathetic to BIP 110, switching your software and voting with your hash rate on pools like Foundry actively shifts that balance of power. As price and node density move to BIP 110, the hash rate will follow, and the block times will accelerate.
But you're glossing over the scale of the economic velocity required to actually threaten a miner's revenue stream. In 2017, the major economic endpoints, the massive wallet providers and payment processors, were ready to reject non-compliant blocks. Today, a retail user running a node in their living room is, philosophically, it's beautiful, but they do not process billions of dollars in daily trading volume.
True, but
And the dominant software developers have rejected or ignored this proposal. If 99% of the trading volume stays on the legacy chain, a miner whose block gets rejected by a living room node doesn't care. They still get paid by the exchange node that accepts it.
I have to push back there, because that argument treats this network as a purely financial instrument dictated by corporate liquidity, rather than a decentralized protocol dictated by consensus rules. We have historical precedent showing that philosophical splits can survive and thrive against the wishes of the dominant liquidity. Look at the 2016 Ethereum fork. The Ethereum community faced a philosophical crisis over whether to rewrite the blockchain to recover hacked funds or stick to the principle of code is law. The developers and the major exchanges supported the rewrite, but a dedicated faction of nodes refused. The network split. While the corporate liquidity pooled on the rewritten chain, The ideological rift proved that deep cultural disputes can result in permanent surviving networks. I mean, Ethereum Classic is still running today.
Yes, Ethereum Classic survived, but at what cost? It's a fraction of the value of the main network. And more importantly, that was a hard fork with a clean break and built-in replay protection. We're talking about a soft fork without those safety nets. If you want to know how this plays out in real time, just watch the block explorers in August. If you see a major legacy explorer showing one block height and a not spaced explorer showing a completely different block height, a split has occurred.
And the friction begins.
And if that happens, the lack of replay protection acts as a death sentence for the minority chain. Exchanges will lock it out to protect themselves, leaving the fork isolated and unusable for anyone who isn't, a cryptographic expert.
Well, as we approach this historic deadline, it's clear the stakes couldn't be higher. I maintain that BIP 110, despite its aggressive 55% threshold and the undeniable technical friction of lacking explicit replay protection, it represents a necessary line in the sand. It relies on the fundamental, founding principle of this network, that node operators, the everyday users enforcing the consensus rules, they must have the ultimate power to define what the network is. If we capitulate to miners and institutional capital, simply because they hold the liquidity, we risk allowing the network to become bloated, centralized, and repurposed into a mere data storage layer for arbitrary digital artifacts. The biological immune system of the nodes just has to be allowed to reject the infection.
And I maintain that a user-activated soft fork requires overwhelming economic consensus, not just a technical flag activated in a minority software client. Attempting to solve a cultural dispute over block space using a 55% fork without replay protection is a highly dangerous strategy. It risks user funds through cross-chain replay attacks, and it threatens network stability. History shows us that miners follow revenue, and revenue is dictated by the massive economic nodes, your exchanges and custodians, who prioritize stability above all else. Without their backing, BIP 110 risks choking on its own difficulty adjustment and creating an economically isolated ghost chain.
We clearly remain at an impasse over whether ideological node operators or institutional liquidity ultimately wields power over the network's consensus rules. But we don't have to wait long for the answer.
No, we really don't. The mid-August signaling window will lay the math bare for everyone to see. The market and the hash power will decide.
I encourage everyone listening to monitor the BIP4 signaling and the block heights as we approach block 961632. Watch how this ecosystem actually resolves a standoff when billions of dollars and deeply held cypherpunk philosophies collide.
It will certainly be a stress test of the highest order.
It always is. Think back to our global library. If the librarians change the locks to keep out the shipping containers, but the rest of the world decides they actually want a storage warehouse instead of a library, well, who really owns the building? We'll leave you to draw your own conclusion. Until next time,